Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Kari and today I am wrapping up Booktubeathon. It is August 6th, so Booktubeathon ended yesterday, and the original challenge, we'll say, was to read 7 books in 7 days. And then there were 6 other challenges to help motivate which choice of a book you read. Let's get started. Technically I read 8.5 books, and I say 8.5 because I finally finished The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Hermes Gawar. I started this one back in May, and then I got 150 pages into it and had to stop for the bar, and finally finished it during Booktubeathon, reading the remaining 250 pages or so during last week. So finally finished this one, which is about a captain, well, not a captain, an owner of ships whose captain comes to tell him that he's sold a ship for a mermaid, and that makes the owner a lot of money, and he is introduced into a different sort of lifestyle than he is accustomed to. And then there's Angelica, who is a courtesan, as they call her, and their lives start to intertwine because of this mermaid. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it a 4 or 5 out of 5 because it's just very intriguing and different. And then for one of the challenges, which was to read and then watch a book to movie adaptation, I went with Everything Everything by Nicola Yoon. This was one of 3 choices for me, the other ones being Crazy Rich Asians, which I am currently reading, and Pride and Prejudice, which I will be reading sometime this month. I am posting an August TBR in the next week, so I'll let you know then as well. At any rate, I read Everything Everything and then watched the adaptation, and I have to say, first of all, I was not expecting to like the book as much as I did, because I don't generally like mixed media. I prefer it to be told in straight text, you know, prose, dialogue, that whole thing. And this is told in pictures that are her diary or medical reports, that kind of thing, which was very new to me. And I have to say, again, I actually liked it more than I thought. It is a YA contemporary, which is another reason I didn't entirely know how much I was going to like it. And the movie and the book actually followed each other relatively closely, which I was impressed with. They did take out some of the meetings and sort of shortened and simplified things in the movie, but they always do that, so that's to be expected. I liked how they followed it, and I think they did a good job with casting too. It was just fun. So I gave this book a 4 out of 5 stars for just to read 7 books, and then I got a little bit ambitious and went for another one. So my 8th book was Brooklyn by Colm Toibin. This is a book about a young woman from Ireland in the 1950s who goes over to the United States and gets a job as a shop assistant. This is very different than I thought it would be. I gave it a 3.5 primarily because there were just some moments that made me cringe so badly that I couldn't enjoy it. One of them was her looking back with pleasure on having had sex with her boyfriend, even though at the time she was having sex, she was tensed up all over and wanted him to stop and pull out. Personally, those things don't match. If you hate it when it's happening, you shouldn't look back on it with pleasure later. That doesn't make sense to me. And the other was just how she acted in Ireland after being in New York. It made me cringe and I hated it, but the rest of the book was good and it was well written. My 7th book was Long May She Reign by Rhiannon Thomas, and first of all, the naked cover is not beautiful, but this little beaker with the castle is just adorable, and I love it. Second of all, this was a surprisingly good book. There are, thanks be to God, no love triangles in this book, which we all know I abhor beyond anything else. It's about a young woman who is 23rd in line to the throne. Suddenly, the first 22 people in line and the king all die, and she has to solve the why of it and, you know, be queen all at the same time. There's a lot of political intrigue in this, and she's trying to fix the infrastructure and avoid war, and it seems like her advisors are against her. I give this book a 4 out of 5 stars as well because I did enjoy it. There was some insta-love, or at least insta-lust, but it sort of then, over the course of the book, turned into friends with that strange tingly feeling that books describe as love and that kind of thing. Again, I liked this book. It was my 7th. For my book with green on the cover, I went with Willa of the Wood by Robert Beatty. This naked hardback is beautiful. Do you see this? Because, oh my gosh, I honestly think I might like this better than the dust jacket, which is rare, let's be honest. But this book is about a 12 or 13-year-old girl in 1900 North Carolina, the Smoky Mountains, and she is part of the Fae, essentially, of the Smoky Mountains. Something goes very wrong, she's very different and realizes this, and then she's to save her people. I really enjoyed this book. It was much darker than I anticipated, but having read his Seraphina series, I probably should have known that his writing was going to continue to be dark. And it sucks you in so much because it's so good. I give this one a 5 out of 5, I think. And then we were supposed to read a book while wearing the same hat. I don't own a hat, so instead I went with Maleficent horns from my sister Christina when she was working in Disney a year ago now. So I wore these while I read actually 2 books because they were short and I read them at the same time, or rather consecutively, and it just sort of made sense. The first one is Big Bad Ironclad by Nathan Hale, and the second one is Treaties, Trenches, Mud and Blood by Nathan Hale. These books are so much more than I expected. They are historical graphic novels, and this one talks about the ironclads of the Civil War, and this one talks about the entirety of World War I. Not just a part of it, not just the land, although it does focus on the land aspect of it, but basically a broad overview of World War I. These books are hilarious. They start with the spy Nathan Hale from the Revolutionary War, and he's on the gallows talking to the executioner and the guard there and trying to, postpone his death. And he says, I know stories, because he's been sucked into a history book and now he can see the future. Which, first of all, is just a great way to put that. And so these are the stories he's telling his executioner on the gallows. And you see the executioner rather, and the guard pop up throughout the story to make certain comments like, well, why aren't they fighting with bayonets? Or, that's iron, it can't possibly float. And he's got just fun little anecdotes in here as well about, for example, William Cushing in Big Bad Ironclad, who went to a military academy but was kicked out of the Navy like 3 times because he just couldn't keep his sense of humor in check, and the Navy did not appreciate that, let me tell you. And then at the end, specifically in this one, he has these research babies, which is where he puts his bibliography and, all that kind of stuff. And so in the World War I book, Treaties, Trenches, Mud and Blood, at the end, Nathan Hale peeks over the page and panics, where's the bibliography? And why are the research babies crying? And they're just wailing at him, you can't ever do a whole war again. It's great. I laughed so many times reading these books, and I learned that there are, I think, 9 total. So now I have to go get the rest of them because I am just so excited for a new medium, basically, to read history in. For the Beautiful Spine Challenge, I went with Leigh Bardugo's Language of Thorns, which I gave, I think, a 4 out of 5 overall. There were several stories that were a 2 or a 3 for me. My favorites were Ayama and The Little Knife. The Little Knife primarily because it dealt with water, and Ayama because I really liked the idea behind the story. So this book, as you may know, is set in the Grishaverse, and as the stories go, they keep changing and growing the illustrations on each page until they get to a full-page one. The illustrations were definitely the best thing about this. The writing was fine, it's simple, it's YA, but the illustrations were phenomenal. So even if you don't want to read the stories, go through the illustrations. Then for the first book, which was to be decided between a coin toss, and I chose between Willa of the Wood and How to Be a Tutor. My last book, obviously, is How to Be a Tutor by Ruth Goodman. This is a nonfiction about, you guessed it, how to be a tutor. I love this book. I give this a 5 out of 5 stars, hands down. It was amazing. Not even gonna pause. This book goes literally from dawn to dusk until they go to bed. through every possible aspect of the lower and middle classes' days. She talks about what the men do for work and why plowing is a man's work. She talks about how each of them dress and why a man's dress was so much more important than a woman's. She talks about women's work. She talks about what they eat for breakfast. She talks about what and when they eat lunch or dinner. She talks about what and when they eat supper, which is our evening meal, and some of the differences between the classes. She talks about the sumptuary laws or the clothing laws. She talks about sex and the Tudor attitude towards it, which was actually very interesting because there were so many things in this book that I didn't recognize, not least of was the sexual attitude at the time. I honestly just cannot say enough good about this book. It is amazing and a beautifully done overview of a day in the Tudor life. Ruth Goodman has also done many of these things herself, and so she explains some of them in great detail, and it was fun to try to figure it out. She also went through a lot of her sources. For the example, one of her big sources was the wills of some of these people, and that's how you get what was important. Some of their clothing was important, depending on the quality of it. So their beds were apparently the most important thing they had, which also I didn't realize. I learned so much from this book, and in case you can't tell by the amount I'm talking about it, I loved it! Anyway, I'm gonna stop talking about this now because you're probably bored. So those are all the books I read during Booktubeathon. Like I said, 8.5 books. Either way, I completed all 7 challenges, and I'm rather proud of myself for that because I didn't expect to be able to read 7 books. Anyway, that's all I have, so I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a big thumbs up down below, and if you want to see more content like this, hit that subscribe button down below. As always, I will leave my Goodreads linked in the down bar if you want to check out any of the reviews I have on there for these books or others, or just what I generally read. Until my next video, bye.